Israeli infiltration and interception of American consciousness continues. Obviously, it's not as successful. Having said that, however, that's not stopping them from trying. They're spending billions at this point. Quincy Institute's Nick Cleveland Stout went on Steve Bannon to talk about his latest article that covers Netanyahu says Israel's fighting an eighth front for the hearts and minds of Americans. The price tag since October 2023 has been over $1 billion. $46.5 million to Trump's former campaign manager to build websites shaping how AI chatbots talk about Israel. This is, of course, reference to Brad Parscale's operation, working with Salem Media as well, the right-wing Christian nationalist network that Scott Jennings is a part of. $45 million to Google, YouTube, and Meta to deny the hunger crisis in Gaza. $3.2 million to affirm that geofenced American churches during worship. The problem, for the first time ever, more Americans now sympathize with Palestinians than Israelis. So it's not working. Israel spent over $1 billion on public diplomacy efforts since 2023, including more than $100 million on efforts to influence the U.S. Disclosed under the Foreign Agents Registration Act, this country is now on track to be the biggest FARA spender this year. Now, what's interesting about this is the stuff that we know that's targeted by FARA, because a lot of what Israel gets to do on American soil, that it utilizes the evangelical Christian network and also many of the Zionist organizations that masquerade as like Jewish advocacy organizations, are homegrown. They're American. They're comprised of American citizens, sometimes dual citizens, but it doesn't matter. That's not a part of the FARA restriction. So the actual impact is far larger, even though the FARA expenditure here is on track to become the largest. Okay, this is just the tip of the iceberg, however. And then there's also obviously a lot of the covert operations. Lindsey Graham trips to Israel, coming back and talking to fucking Donald Trump. Shit that you hear on Wall Street Journal, CNN, and all these other outlets. They're not dinged as, foreign agents operating at the behest of a foreign state. That's just a regular Sunday. Jacob Wendler on Political Reports with help from Daniel Lippman. First in PI. FARA Friday. Israel shifting away from its traditional strategy of relying on American-led groups like AIPAC to advance its interests in the U.S. and is instead increasing hiring foreign agents to ramp up its influence efforts, per a new paper from foreign policy think tank Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. Israel has spent over $1 billion on public diplomacy efforts since 2023, including more than $100 million on efforts to influence the U.S., disclosed under the Foreign Agents Registration Act. Per the new report from Nick Cleveland Stout, a research associate in Quincy Institute's Democratizing Foreign Policy program, the country is now on track to be the biggest FARA spender this year. 17 new firms registered under FARA to work for Israeli interests in 2024 and 2025, including former Trump campaign manager Brad Parscale's firm Clock Tower X, which holds the largest contract at $46.5 million. Per the report, Clock Tower X has disclosed attempts to seed pro-Israel framing. Nearly $1 billion to try and melt the minds of American boomers, American evangelical Christians, and still failing to do so. Here's the video between Steve Bannon and Nick Cleveland talking about this. I can't believe I'm showing you Steve Bannon, but...
Cleveland Stout from Quincy. You've got a report that I want to make sure we go through it in detail so people can see and read for themselves and look at your backup data so they come to their own conclusion. But it's pretty jaw-dropping. You basically assert from your research that since October 7th, the Hamas attack, terrorist attack, surprise attack on Israel, that since roughly that time, is it $1 billion or close to $1 billion has been spent by Israel for influencers and radio? And I'm not saying Sid or Mark Levin took that money. I just want to use that as an example of some of the over-the-top pitches you're hearing on Fox News right now. But that $1 billion has gone in an influence operation, very sophisticated, very systematic, not just onesies, twosies, but to basically change opinion or to influence opinion and then political action in the United States, sir?
Yeah, first of all, thanks so much for having me. But that's exactly right, that about $1 billion has been allocated for public diplomacy, Hasbara efforts abroad, not just in the U.S., but you can... I tracked about 100 million of those dollars has been spent under the Foreign Agents Registration Act, which is, as your viewers are probably well aware, this law that requires contractors, lobbyists of foreign governments to disclose what they're doing on behalf of foreign governments. So Yeah, it's a lot of money, and it's being used for a lot of things, influencing chatbots, paying influencers, reaching out to evangelical Christians, all kinds of things that we can get into.
Now, this is separate. I just want to make sure this is separate from AIPAC and money they put in either for lobbying or.
Yeah, AIPAC doesn't get hit with fair restrictions, for the record. Just so you understand, a single American evangelical organization, International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, sends like $100 million to Israel per year. These investments in propagandizing to America pays dividends just in pure cash. Exactly. So Israel registering as a foreign agent to specifically geofence Christian evangelical churches, to specifically target Salem, which is what Brad Parscale is doing, which is the Christian Evangelical Network. That pays dividends back to Israel because all of these Christian evangelicals then collect donations and fundraise for a lot of the West Bank operations, a lot of the West Bank settlement operations. All tax-free, by the way. It's outright illegal, and yet it's still tax-free, all these tax-free donations. It's fantastic. You're wondering why it's so difficult to get this message across to some Americans. If you're wondering why it's so tough, it's so hard to get politicians to be more understanding, it's because there's a lot of financial interests at play here. There's a lot of moneyed interests at play. Israel is now on track to become the largest spender on foreign influence under FARA in 2026, more than even Gulf neighbors like the UAE, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia. This was a breakdown of the report, which we'll go through right now. Israel has spent more than $100 million since 2023 on foreign lobbying in the U.S. to influence chatbots, to sponsor delegations of influencers, to carry out mass texting campaigns. Some of the mass texting campaigns are AI. You have probably received, I have received questions about what my feelings are on Israel as an ally to the United States of America. U.S. survey groups, right? I'm sure plenty of you, because it's so all-encompassing, it's so broad that they do push polls to basically manipulate people's attitudes about Israel by framing it as though it's a polling operation. That's this program. They're funding Christian theology programs. They're also creating a network of websites specifically designed to manipulate AI so that the LLMs, the large language models that people readily use, that people rely on, that people actually trust a lot, will spit out pro-Israeli propaganda. It is unbelievably nefarious. It is insidious. And in many respects, it's being done in broad daylight. The ADL, led by Jonathan Greenblatt, has been quite open about these attempts. Jonathan Greenblatt goes to synagogues all around the country and goes on these different panels all around the country and openly admits to it. They talk about how they are designing websites specifically to manipulate chatbots, to manipulate ChatGPT and other large language models. It's insane. French PR firm Havas Media is central to Israel's new strategy, directing tens of millions of dollars to Americans eager to be the foot soldiers of Israel's new information war for the right price. Here are all of the American firms that Havas Media has directed resources and funds to. Clock Tower X, Show Faith Works LLC, outreach to evangelicals. Bridges Partners LLC, $900,000, overseeing a social media influencer cohort. Piro Inc., Targeted Communications Global, parent company Stagwell, for media outreach, mostly the conservative media like Fox News and New York Post. Davis Media New York City LLC, parent company Stagwell, for a social media campaign. SKDK Knickerbocker LLC, parent company Stagwell, media outreach, no longer active. Clock Tower received the largest sum. This is Brad Parscale's operation, former Trump social media manager. Brad Parscale's operation, and the $28.5 million that they received comes, the $28.5 million that they received for integrating pro-Israel messaging into Salem Media. As I told you, Salem Media is the premier Christian evangelical broadcaster. Scott Jennings is a part of Salem Media. Many others are a part of Salem Media. They've also utilized Brad Parscale's also utilized these websites that I was talking about, influencing artificial intelligence services such as Claude, in carrying out a texting campaign. And the projected contract total number is $46.5 million. This is part of an overall strategy from Netanyahu to win the eighth front, the battle for hearts and minds, as Benjamin Netanyahu calls it. Israel has invested over $1 billion in overall public diplomacy or Hasbara efforts since 2023, with $750 million of that being allocated for 2026. So if you're wondering why there's so much more Islamophobia, if you're wondering why there are so many attacks against prominent critics of Israel, whether it be Zohar Mamdani or even someone like myself, no matter how big or small they might be. This is where it's coming from. They are spending unbelievable amounts of money to do this. They're spending unbelievable amounts of money to try to desperately cling on to the remaining demographics, the far right, or not the far right necessarily, but like the evangelical Christian base for Trump. And they're doing everything they can to make prominent critics of Israel's lives a living hell. But even as Israel invests more, American public opinion towards Israel continues to plummet. A Gallup poll this year found that for the first time ever, more Americans sympathize with Palestinians at 41% than Israelis at 36%. Think about that. That's never happened because that's how toxic Israel is. That's how much of a social pariah Israel has become, that Americans recognize Israel and its toxic influence over American domestic policy and certainly over American foreign policy. It's over, in spite of their best attempts. But this means our job is not done. This means we can't let up. This means that we have to keep pushing. We have to continue telling the truth, no matter what the cost is. A few years ago, Israel barely invested in formal influence operations under Farah, especially since pro-Israel orgs like AIPAC were so effective. For the longest time, Israel got to do, Zionist indoctrination through pro-Israel groups, Israel First groups that masqueraded as Jewish advocacy groups on U.S. soil with loyal soldiers of Israel, whether they be Zionist Jews in prominent positions of power or the far larger number of evangelical Zionists, Christian evangelical Zionists. It's a multifaceted approach as well. It doesn't just stay with the Republican side. Unlike many other issues, this issue was not as politically polarizing as it has become in the United States of America. It was not as partisan as it's become in the United States of America. For the longest time in the United States of America, there were plenty of Zionist advocacy operations, Hasbara operatives that were deeply embedded and worked within the confines of the liberal progressive movement as well. This has always been the case in the Western world. That's why there's a term for it in our corner of the world. We call it PEP, Progressive Except for Palestine. This is part of the reason why you've probably seen so many people that you thought were wonderful, progressive, social justice warriors show that they have a very hypocritical stance when it comes to the human rights disaster that we have contributed to with American tax dollars, with American munitions, and American social and political cover on the international stage. If you're wondering how this happened, well, Zionist indoctrination for decades and decades that went unimpeded. And yet they're still losing. Shannon Watts is a great example of a Hasbara operative. Okay, Shannon Watts, Moms Demand Action, Fred Gutenberg, a victim of the mass shooting incident, the school shooting incident. These are people who have been prominent activists on the progressive space for a very long time. And yet, while they have spent a good deal of time criticizing the NRA for its toxic influence on American politics, its destructive influence on American democracy, they do not have the same attitude about the largely MAGA billionaire funded AIPAC, because AIPAC funds all of these other groups as well. If you're wondering how someone like Shannon Watts can be so adamant about ending school shootings here for American children, but then find themselves defending school explosions over there for the children of Gaza, for the children of Lebanon, for the children of Iran, well, that's because AIPAC has been a prominent funder, or AIPAC-style subsidiary organizations and liberal Zionists have played a major role in funding these other advocacy networks. So it's always been a multifaceted approach. For the evangelical Christians, you talk about the theological justifications for why Israel must be as violent as it is, why there must be a demographic replacement of all the non-Jews in the land known as Israel, the Greater Israel Project. There's a theological justification for the evangelical Zionists. For the liberals, there's pink washing. For the liberals, you say Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. Israel is the gayest country in the Middle East, when Lebanon is right there, ironically enough. Lebanon, which is known for
I'm gay and Lebanese.
For the NATO Atlanticists, Israel plays a formative role in creating an American defense umbrella in the region against these scary enemies. For the people who are worried about ISIS, Israel plays a role in combating ISIS when it ironically has not. They lie about this too. So there is a different way to propagandize to different audiences, and Israel has obviously operated a very sophisticated Hasbara operation for each individual demographic and each individual psychographic profile on U.S. soil. And they've done this for decades. In spite of that sophisticated propaganda apparatus, Americans have woken up to what Israel has been getting up to. For the past 3 years, they've seen what Israel does. And now they hate it. They hate it because many of the envoys, many of the advocates of Israel are also unbelievably entitled. They're so arrogant. They constantly demand more. They take for granted the billions of dollars, 380 billion since the inception of the Israeli state for the past 80 years of money that they've received. They take for granted the MOU that Barack Obama signed off on, $3.8 billion of direct cash to the Israeli state so they can come back and purchase Tamir interceptors. Contract that's supposed to end soon. That was Obama's goodbye message to Israel. On the way out, he signed off on the Memorandum of Understanding for Israel, a decade of $3.8 billion a year. And this is before we even talk about the loyalists to Israel, the Israel firsters that operate in a lot of these mainstream circles. Jake Tapper, Dana Bash, Ross Douthat, virtually all of the highest profile news anchors have a very specific and very clear bias towards Israel, even in spite of all of that. Americans are still demanding an arms embargo. Americans are still demanding that we no longer give money to Israel in overwhelming numbers. In just 3 years' time, in spite of this all-encompassing, unbelievably sophisticated propaganda apparatus and influence peddling operation and direct cash infusions to the campaigns of virtually every politician in this goddamn country, Israel's fallen out of favor with the American public. The collapse in American public support for Israel, particularly over Gaza and Iran, changed the calculus for Israel. But instead of questioning the policies that led to that collapse, Israel has doubled down on the influence operations. Israel's now on track to become the largest spender of foreign influence under FARA in 2026. This is not the AIPAC style influence peddling that we see. Okay, this is just the foreign registry, the foreign agent registered amount. Nick Cleveland Stout also has a timeline detailing Israel's new lobby, showing key moments in Israel's influence operations ramping up. There are no signs of this slowing down, with Israel most recently hiring a producer of Spike Lee's Inside Man to produce pro-Israel social media content. A lot of this is disclosed in the Justice Department documents, but a lot of it is not. Not under FARA includes $700,000 in Israeli government funds to Eagle's Wings to lobby the USG on the U.S.-Israel military relationship. Social media influencers paid by Israel. Only one social media influencer, Yoav Davis, has registered. Names of consulting firms that have been subcontracted. We know that these kinds of influence operations can change minds. One social media influencer who went on a paid trip to Israel told me that she was radicalized by the trip. Israeli influence can be successful at reaching social media feeds, targeting key delegations, and reaching the pews of churches while still failing to move public opinion. But influence alone cannot be a substitute for an organic shift in response to unpopular policies. Just something to consider for when you see so many random people on the timeline who spend a good deal of time defending Israel in very strange ways. Sometimes that could just be hand-waving away Israel's influence. Sometimes it's someone just implying that you're anti-Semitic because you're like, why do you hyper-focus on AIPAC? Because no other country has this level of deep, embedded propaganda on U.S. soil. Not a single other country touches a fraction of this. Tenet is a great example of this, which was a Russian operation where Russia contracted a Canadian media organization that went to the likes of Tim Pool, Dave Rubin, Benny Johnson, and many others, and gave them money. Gave them money in exchange for pro-Russian, or rather anti-Ukraine propaganda. That was investigated and uncovered by the Department of Justice. Okay? Department of Justice investigated that. Now, of course, none of the Republican operatives that took that money actually received any legal scrutiny when they should have. In my opinion, it's fucking treason. It's what they say I'm doing with my commentary on America's actions against Cuba, or my commentary on China, not as a foreign adversary, but as a country that we need to have a better relationship with. They say that is paid propaganda. They say that is treason. Meanwhile, these guys are actually doing the treason. These opinions that I hold are my own. As far as Perplexity, when I asked Perplexity if it's beneficial for the U.S. to enhance military cooperation with Israel, it responded with a one-word answer, yes. The top source cited is alivia.org, a website created specifically for Israel to influence chatbots. When asked Perplexity if it's beneficial for the U.S. to enhance military cooperation with Israel, it responded with a one-word answer, yes. This person asked, have you asked each one if they disclose the identity or who's funding the sites they are sourcing? I just asked ChatGPT, and they said they would have reference, for example, the Israeli government if the website disclosed the info. Yeah. When I asked chatbots about the latest news from paxpoint.org, one of the sites, Perplexity and Copilot did not flag that the site was created as a part of an Israel influence operation. Claude, ChatGPT, and Gemini did flag the caveat. But if they are just citing these sources, people have to click on the site and go all the way to the bottom of the page to see that it's part of an Israeli influence operation. One of the newest versions of Israel Hasbara, now that I'm done covering this situation, here is Israelis openly conspiring to inject pro-Israel bias into AI. This is at the AJC. It's one of those conferences where they just openly talk about it, by the way. The American Jewish Committee.
See genuine opportunity. How can AI help improve Jewish representation in all these issues?
The really cool thing about AI is that while it can become a great ally for our enemies, if we act early, it can be exactly the opportunity that we need. After missing the boat with social media, AI is now becoming the dominant source of information, the main source of information. People trust AI more than anything else. They trust AI more than social media. They turn to chatbots like ChatGPT and Gemini instead of using Google, and young people use these bots instead of Google in very, very, very large numbers. So this is becoming the main source of information. And so when I say this, I still find Jewish people being discouraged. They say, oh, but Wikipedia is already so anti-Semitic and social media is so anti-Semitic. Why bother? The AI just learns from all of this data. So, whatever, not much we can do. But that's not true. Because over the past 2 years, the AI companies have been moving towards alignment. So instead of the algorithms sort of honestly representing what's in the data, we're finding that these chatbots and the text-to-image models are increasingly showing us exactly what the companies want us to see. Okay? So it's becoming intentional, which means that instead of trying to control the whole world and trying to somehow manage what's happening in this big blob of Wikipedia and social media, we can go directly to the companies with clear technical and advocacy solutions. So for the first time, there is a path to correcting the digital world.
The ADL, by their own admission, is already doing this.
We're in regular contact with the major AI companies, and I'm proud to share making a difference. For example, last year, we showed OpenAI how its new video generation AI tool, Sora, made it easy to create anti-Semitic videos. We worked it out with them, laid out the facts, and then 9 months later, when version 2 came out, Sora now refuses to generate videos around several of the specific concepts that we discussed and shared with OpenAI's team.
The operation isn't primarily aimed at persuading people, the drop site reports. Its goal is to persuade artificial intelligence. Internal contract language signed directly with the Israeli government explicitly stated that Parscale would deploy websites and content to deliver GPT framing results on GPT conversations. The site received very little human traffic, but are structured to be picked up by AI. They tested it with Perplexity. The network consists of 10 different websites, each promoting a different Israeli narrative. Examples include Israel's a nation of peace, Israel protects civilians, slaying Gaza journalists were Hamas members, Israel's not committing a genocide, U.S.-Israel military integration benefits Americans. Each site discloses at the bottom that it's distributed on behalf of the state of Israel. The campaign doesn't just influence chatbot search results, though. It also appears to be entering data sets used to train future AI models. DropSite found Parscale sites had already been archived 912 times by Common Crawl, one of the largest repositories used to train large language models. So their goal isn't to convince people at this stage. Their goal is to get the AI to convince people eventually, but their goal is to basically infiltrate AI and train AI to deliver pro-Israel outputs, and specifically pro-Israel propaganda, like the military merger being an overall benefit for America. That is a direct and immediate goal of the Israeli government. It's incredible. Research told DropSite the campaign is sophisticated because it avoids obvious propaganda. Instead, the articles are heavily sourced, tightly organized, written in a measured tone, filled with bullet points and key takeaways. Exactly the type of content AI systems are more likely to retrieve and summarize. The operation has grown dramatically. Parscale originally signed a 1.5 million per month contract with Israel. It has since expanded to roughly 4.5 million every month, about 46.5 million overall. Campaign also includes anonymous text message operations posing as grassroots peace groups that direct Americans to the same websites. The implications go far beyond search results. As more people rely on AI to answer political and historical questions, governments are increasingly competing to shape what those systems retrieve and eventually what they learn. That's where we're at. And perhaps one of the less sophisticated versions of this Hasbara propaganda is something that I saw on my timeline earlier today. And I have to show you, because remember, it's not just about manipulating public opinion to like Israel. It's also about attacking Israel's critics, attacking Israel's prominent critics. And it's also about pushing Islamophobia. One of the major vectors of Islamophobic hate has always been Ilhan Omar. Trigger warning, you are going to see straight pussy in here, okay? I'm just letting you guys know, camel toe warning ahead of time. Dogs are out as well. This is the slop the pro-Israel crowd pushes on young conservative men that target the audience of Israel's 8th Front war campaign. Here it is. No, it's literally insane. It's the most insane thing I've ever watched.
Can we please stop addressing Ilhan Omar as a congresswoman?
It literally starts off with her pulling up her Lululemons for the camel toe.
Can we please stop addressing Ilhan Omar as a congresswoman? I mean, she's literally a fraud. This is a person who came to the USA to corrupt its people and resources. She went from negative $65,000 net worth to over $30 million and denies it. She denies it and she blames it on an accounting error. That's not all. Then there's the winery with no clear location, no wine at all, no phone number, no visible operations. It seems abnormal, doesn't it? And then she proceeds to insult the reporter asking about these things, asking her to explain it to the people. And on top of all of these unknown things, she calls World War II World War XI. So how is someone so fucking stupid able to become an important topic in this country? She is literally the trending topic in the United States of America. It blows my mind. She is the opposite of everything that we stand for in this country. And she literally married her brother. We do not marry our brothers here. We don't marry siblings here. We do not do that. Can we please stop addressing?
I've never seen anything like it. I just don't think that anyone is going to listen to this and be like, well, hell yeah, I heard everything you said, Queen. They're going after gooners now. This is insane. And for the record, it's not old. It's not new. This is old school. Same propaganda strategy that the IDF has deployed all the time. They have done, the IDF, the Israeli occupying forces, have always deployed sex to sell the IDF in general. They've done gooner bait before. I've talked about this before. She's delivering 2010 talking points while cooter mogging, don't hate the player, hate the game. Like, this is insane. What the fuck is going on? Why is she just like straight up giving us pussy? Like, it's not even fucking like hidden. Like, she's not even like trying to do this in a tasteful way. Dogs are out, hikes up the fucking pants every time, showing straight cooter. What is going on? She's hitting the fucking labia exam position. Ain't nobody sits like that for fun. Yeah, it's not even sexy. It's borderline sexual harassment, dude. I just perused some videos, but I bet Savannah is infinitely more well-adjusted than 80% of the so-called right-wing Foyd sphere. She doesn't pretend to be something she's not, and she's well aware of what she's doing to gain a following and generate revenue. Low neurosis, not bad. She doesn't get any views on out. That's going to change soon, now that she went fucking viral for this shit. I've never seen anything like this, dude. Yeah, new account. Follow my IG. Sav Cannon Talk, Sav Cannon. Who's our audience for this shit? Gooners. Fight back, big bro. All right, dude. Dick Prince. That's what we got to do. I got to ramp up. The meat pics. I got to go back to the tank tops and ramp up the fucking meat pics. Is this not AI? No, I don't think it is. Start clapping cheeks, brother. No hands. Fight fire with fire. Anyway, I'm in shock at how egregious, how aggressive this is. All cooter mog all day. Moose knuckle time, brother. So glad you decided to wear a suit while covering this. Yes, I am moving in the opposite direction. I'm being presentable. That's the latest Hasbara operation from Israel.